Something that you won't often hear talked about in the breathwork sphere is this idea of breathing into your ribcage, or creating some form of ribcage expansion. What's often put forth is this idea of diaphragmatic breathing. What's misleading about this is when you look at how it's conventionally approached, it looks something like this. Breathing one directionally into your guts and projecting your belly forward. Now, this isn't entirely a bad thing, and for some people, this may be what they need more of. But more often than not, people tend to already be oriented towards this more forward and compressed posture. What's important to keep in mind is that your body is made up of a lot of stuff. Not only do we have muscles and bone, we also have organs, blood, a lot of water, and a gaseous exchange that happens at a physiological level. And when you go and throw gravity in the mix, you get a form of pressure. This intertwined and intricate relationship can and does create an imbalance of where pressure gets organized in the body. You throw in poor lifestyle habits, sprinkle in some inflammation and atrophy, and things start not looking so hot. So how do you reorganize this pressure? And what does it mean to genuinely take a diaphragmatic breath where you're not feeding compression, but using it to take yourself to a state of expansion? Well, in this video, you're going to learn all about that and walk away with an understanding and perspective on breathing and ribcage expansion you didn't have before. Let's jump into it. So one of the primary reasons as to why we want to start to get used to breathing into the ribs is to get ourselves into more of a decompressed position, or really just give our body an understanding of how to create spacing between where our ribcage and hips are. Typically when we're more oriented in this compressed position and we have kind of that belly or pooch belly, it is because of this excess of compression happening from gravity over time and us one directionally breathing primarily into our belly. So we're gonna kind of take the belly out of the equation for this first exercise and work on almost isolating the breath into the rib cage. So for this first technique, you are gonna come onto your back and grab yourself a kettlebell if you got one. A heavy water bottle will do here as well, but you're looking for anything between about 8 to 12 pounds. So once you're laying down, you're gonna grab the tool of your choice and you're gonna take that just beneath your belly button. And really this is intended to apply some pressure down, kind of into the guts. We're gonna try not to use it as a tool to breathe against, but actually breathe away from. So it's applying some resistance down into our belly. And to begin with, I want you to start to generate some feedback of almost solely breathing into your rib cage. Now be mindful that as you're going through this, you're not starting to overly stress the system or breathing into the neck or into the traps. Really what we're gonna try to focus on here is almost an imaginary space in between our lungs. And from that space, we're gonna attempt to start to create some expansion from it. When we go through the exhale, we can do a slight projection of the belly. You can see that I'm just gently pushing the kettlebell away from me. But then as I go back into the inhale, I'm really trying to focus on that volume of pressure coming back into the rib cage. Now this likely goes against almost everything that you've been taught as it relates to breathing diaphragmatically. But for now, we're not focused so much on breathing through the abdominal wall as we are on just creating that expansion and space between the rib cage and the pelvis. For this next one, we're gonna continue with the theme of isolating the breath into the ribs for the most part, but we're gonna really start to bring awareness into the lateral elements. To start with, you can just do so right in the computer chair that you're watching this video from, and you're gonna take either palm and you're just gonna kind of squeeze or place your hands on either side of your ribs, and you're gonna start to create a pressure towards the center of your body. What we are attempting to do here is create an initial form of compression or bringing ourselves into a deeper state of compression, so then we can create some level of spacing and expansion away from it. What I tend to prioritize when I'm working through this exercise is almost imagining that my elbows are kind of stretching or moving away from one another, and that the upper pec fibers and really my chest is almost starting to volumize or fill out the more that I go through this breath cycle. Something to be mindful of here is that you're not overly breathing into the neck or the shoulders where you start to notice that there's a lot of shrugging happening. Really just try to focus on the lateral elements and the elbows just moving away from one another, and that's gonna limit how much of the elevation that's going to occur, but still allow a lot of that expansion to happen around it. So for this next one, I am using dip bars. If you have dip bars, you can certainly use them, but you can also use just 2 kitchen chairs will work here as well. Just really anything that you can get your elbows kind of extended behind you with. Even the edge of a couch or a countertop would work here as well. To begin with this one, we're gonna start to bring some awareness to our shoulders. So seeing as we are pressing down, your shoulders may have a tendency to wanna come up to the ears or over elevate through the shoulder. So what we're gonna initially start with is just getting the shoulder kind of set or neutral. And that's just gonna be through just a slight depression. Don't go crazy with it. Just enough so that the shoulder is slightly away from the ear, and then you have a little bit of feedback kind of into the armpit and the tricep. So now that we have the shoulder set, we're gonna try to create a sense of broadness kind of between either shoulder. So don't initially start kind of in a collapsed position. What we're gonna wanna do is start to think about opening up, or allowing the sternum to gently project forward. So we're using the shoulders as a form of stability to kind of work from. And then we're gonna take the principles of the first 2 exercises that we were working on, and we're gonna start to create some ribcage expansion around that. So not only are we trying to project the breath forward here, like we were doing in our very first exercise, and not only to the side or laterally, like we were doing in our second exercise, but we're also gonna start to think about breathing backwards. So because the shoulders are kind of set and we have that point of stability to work from, we can start to orient the breath in a more cylindrical fashion. Now, as you're holding this position and going more and more into the exercise, you can start to draw yourself into a little bit more T-spine extension, or think about opening up kind of that front side of your body a little bit more. And as you start to move into extension, just think about starting to create pressure around that position. And this is really how we're starting to reorganize how pressure is getting placed into our body, and also thinking about putting pressure into areas that we may typically not. This starts to provide the framework for the body to understand how to kind of reorganize pressure and just put it into different pockets. And over time, allow us to be more in this expanded and upright position in an unconscious manner. Now, I threw this next one in here for fun because I find it's just a nice way to understand how to create expansion against resistance. And there's a few better exercises to kind of feel that than through something like a push-up or even a dumbbell press would work here as well. Now I'm demoing this in a push-up version. I'm doing so from my knees for people who may be new to push-ups, but you can certainly do this from your toes as well. And really what we're attempting to do is as we come down and we're getting full length through our pecs, but we're also at maximum tension, we're gonna start to take an inhale at that bottom phase. So we're breathing into that resistance. We're using the resistance to breathe against. And then as we go through the pressing motion, we're gonna attempt to maintain that state of expansion. We're not gonna allow ourselves to just recompress back. We're really going to prioritize or attempt to maintain that expansion through the entirety of that press. You can reset the breath, go back to the bottom and just repeat that. Hang out at the bottom for 3 to 4 seconds, breathe against that resistance, press through, and you're probably only gonna be able to get maybe 6 to 8 repetitions here, but that's kind of the idea. We're trying to challenge the muscles and tissues in a different way, around a different pressure and a different breath cycle. So what good is all this breath work if we don't start to tie it into some movement? Ideally, when we're going through motion or just daily life, pressure is kind of getting dispersed, not necessarily evenly, but throughout a lot of different areas of our body. If we deal with a lot of compression or our body only works in one range of motion or overworks in a certain range of motion, then pressure is going to tend to organize itself around that position. So what we're going to start to do is work into extension and starting to get used to creating expansion as we move through this phase of extension. So what we're doing here is just creating a pendulum with the arms and just using that to dynamically take us in and out of a hinge. Now, as you can see, when I'm getting to the top position, I'm kind of making this Y shape with my arms. And the reason for that is we're trying to bring some length or openness almost through kind of the pec fibers or these tissues on the front side of our body. And at the same time, as I'm standing up, I'm also focusing on that inhalation. I'm thinking about standing up into expansion. And as I come back down, that's when I'm going to recycle the breath. So I go back into the exhale. As I stand up, it's going to be a full inhalation. There's a slight pause at the top, but not too much, because we are trying to breathe almost around the breath. We're trying to tie in the motion or the movement relative to the breath cycle that we are creating underneath it. Now, this is a very conscious approach to breathing in movement. Obviously, we are not going to be thinking about breathing all the time. It is a autonomous function after all. But that being said, it doesn't mean that we can't practice it. It doesn't mean that we can't start to introduce a form of expansion or pressure into an area that we typically don't in a more conscious way. And it's in my opinion, over time, as we start to do this in a conscious way, it inevitably becomes more unconscious over time. So that way when we go to pick up the thing, we go to jump, we go to dunk, whatever it is that you're doing, your body is adept and it kind of has this framework or blueprint of what it is that we're looking to create in that specific range of motion. Having the ability to create ribcage expansion is imperative for proper diaphragm and breathing function. Remember, your lungs aren't down here. They're between this cage for a purpose. There's also another area of your body that I often see underutilized and is extremely important for your daily movement. Go check out a video I did on that right here to find out why.